Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Stallings. Thanks for listening in. If you're interested in looking at my artwork, purchasing originals, or prints, please visit www.jason-stallings.com, where you may already be there. In any case, today I'd like to talk about three paintings that I just completed. They were a little bit smaller than what I normally paint, but I kind of have been doing that out of necessity. The space I've been working in has been smaller than I'm used to working, and also I just kind of need more variety in the scale of works that I have available and that I create. And it does actually, especially in this case, present a really interesting creative challenge. So in that way, it's kind of forced me to simplify my approach a little bit to compositions, and hoping that that is good. And it's kind of a continuation of an approach that I had began with in my Anthony Bourdain portrait. It's not the long-term goal, but it is a deviation and a way to kind of branch out and vary myself and hopefully mature a little bit. I guess kind of on that note with the theme of this painting, which is kind of maturity in a sense. I think the older you get, the more you realize that growth and maturity aren't always a straight line. It's not a bad thing, but it does make reckoning with the aging process and maturity well, perplexing and challenging, but it's not a bad thing. And maybe it is, who knows. So I did base this painting on partly personal experience, partly I was inspired by the film The Green Knight that came out this year in 2021. And the general themes of that story, though it is a kind of interpretation of an old Arthurian legend and mostly a fantasy, pretty much all completely one, is centered around the maturity of a young man, Sir Gawain, who in this particular iteration is actually not a knight to begin with. In some iterations he is, but in any case he is kind of tested by all these challenges after he has an encounter with the Green Knight. I mean, if you've seen the trailers of this movie, it's not a spoiler. The Green Knight, who is this kind of like mythical being, mostly made out of wood, and a product of nature and an embodiment of it, comes into the hall of Arthur and challenges his knights to a real simple act of beheading the knight. And the test would be that they would have to return a year later and face the same consequences and the same actions from the knight himself. And I think in this film, it's really a beautiful and interesting allegory for man's relationship with nature, and it's pretty relevant and will be more relevant in the coming decades. It's kind of scary, but in any case, the idea is not only about personal growth and maturity, but also sort of a message to humanity that nature is not always something that they will have control over, and ultimately they're going to have to face the consequences of their relationship with nature and how they affect it. So the more I think about that, it's really interesting. I wasn't necessarily getting too deep into that aspect of the story, but there are kind of themes of, or there are organic forms. So I would say the initial inspiration for this painting definitely came from that movie. Also some forms of pieces of music like Pearl Jam's No Code, which I've referenced in other paintings, does have this sort of running theme of emotional maturity in it, which is, if you really dig deep enough, it's pretty interesting. Um, but it's more about seeking growth and happiness and personal fulfillment and wisdom. And that's kind of what I've found inspiring by this painting. I would say, in contrast to the last painting I did, which is more of a reaction um, to chaos, this is more me taking a step back and trying to see peace, quiet, and wisdom. So, and that's something I knew from the outset that it was something I wanted to do. So, I think in this case, I'm really successful with it. I'm really happy with the results. There are sort of themes from that Pearl Jam album. Like the first painting has a hand with the eye of God, so to speak, in it, and that is from a line from the song Sometimes, which opens the album. Talks about, it's sort of like this quiet prayer to the higher being, saying that they have big hands and that they challenge man and they are looking to inspire creativity in a way. So there's also a reference to a mosquito in the second painting, where the song word mosquito in that album, which I kind of took as an allegory I tied with the movie, where the symbolism of tested and challenged by negative stimulus or hardship or whatever you want to say, is kind of ever present. I mean, there is a very loose interpretation of these themes and stories, but it's just my attempt to kind of find some personal connection and reconciliation with these ideas as they pertain to my own life. I think that one thing I found is, the further I got into this painting, life happens, you get distracted by other things, and I realized that I didn't quite feel as connected with these concepts as as time went on as I did initially. But I think that's just the nature of taking your time with a piece of art. Your life changes, things change, your mood, your reaction to the world around you can shift and change. So, initially I was kind of like really captivated by this idea, and I still am, but I think I identified with it a little bit less as the days and weeks progressed. But I think ultimately, now that I'm reflecting on it, I definitely kind of feel a stronger connection now that I've really had time to reflect on it and think about it. So one thing I want to touch on is the last painting in the series, where I have an open book. There's an apple in it. It's obviously a knowledge and wisdom kind of represented in there. And there's a pentagram, which could easily be misinterpreted as something sinister, which is not at all the case. And if you watch the symbol, there's a lot of pagan and Christian symbolism kind of peppered in that movie, which is a really interesting thing, because they're not objectively looking to sway anybody or influence anybody's worldview. Simply present these ideas, contrast each other in a way that makes you kind of question your relationship with it. I really like, and I think that's pretty cool use of iconography in a movie. And I'm sure that's made more for people who are more deeply religious inclination than I am. But I'm an artist. Like I've been surrounded by iconography and symbolism my whole life. So something like that is just that to me. It's just a symbol. It doesn't really bear the same kind of meaning. Some maybe inclined towards I don't want to say superstition, but um, they place more of an emphasis on symbols, and so to me, it's objectively just a star. But in the context of Arthurian legend, doing my research, I found it's really interesting, and this kind of ties into the themes of the film. The pentagram is represent each side of the star represents generosity, courtesy, chastity, chivalry, and piety, and that's something on his coat of arms, and that's sort of those are the different tests that the character faces as he goes throughout the story, and definitely like a certain druid element to that. But again, anybody who's really looked into Arthurian legend knows that it's mostly fiction, and that was sort of you could say the first, maybe the first, I'm not sure, maybe the first attempt at sort of mythologizing and history, because it's the exception of maybe Marco Polo, maybe some other characters that I can't think of off the top of my head, but it was the first time you really have British royalty sort of mythologized and elevated into something more than they really were, which is to say that there may have been people that these characters are based off of, but for all intents and purposes, in Godwin are not necessarily real people, but the stories that they're based off of are probably very based on real events. So, in any case, I really found this subject matter in this series really interesting to explore. I never thought that Middle Age Arthurian mythology would be something that would influence my artwork, but here we are. But I think that it's mostly just the result of the movie being that compelling and that interesting. I don't know if the ultimate, there's no real ultimate conclusion to this painting series per se. It's simply just 3 panels of art that kind of represent progression, and a very vague one at that. But it is a progression nonetheless. The first panel is sort of a representation of creation and birth. The second is a representation of aging and maturity and adolescence, perhaps, and the chaotic nature of that. And the third one is growth into adulthood and wisdom, I suppose. I mean, if you really watch, especially the new movie, it's a very ambiguous ending, but I kind of like that, and I think that that's well represented by these paintings. So, again, thanks for listening. Check out my Instagram feed if you haven't already. If you are interested in prints or the originals of this, please check out my website. I'll have that as available as soon as possible. And yeah, I'm really happy to see where this painting series went. And one other thing I wanted to touch on is the use of interference colors in this painting really elevated them in an interesting way, because I had been playing around with that in some other paintings, especially with really to an interesting effect with my painting Meditation #2. But in this case, I had the interference paints work in tandem with the kind of lighter colors of the piece, especially the white and creamy oils that are on kind of towards the end of it. And if you see the painting in certain lights, in certain contexts, it really changes the experience you have with that. And I was pretty happy with how that turned out. That makes reproducing the painting a challenge, but I think the paintings hold up on themselves, on their own, without it, it's just an interesting added bit of like interest for the paintings, and really kind of happy to experiment more with those colors moving forward. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you all soon.